is one of the best opportunities that you could ever have.
Cool. Hey guys, we're gonna go ahead and start pitches shortly. Before we do that, could everyone like in the back and the side kind of like come forward? Let's try and fill up like the first couple rows here, just so it looks a lot more tighter and we can get a lot more engaged. And then when we do that, we can go ahead and get started with pitches. Awesome. So first pitch, we got Hugo.
Hello, hello. Okay, awesome. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Yugam, I'll be presenting my application idea. It's something that me and my roommates who are in the back came up with. So, let's start off with a small poll. How many of y'all have roommates here? Okay, and how many of you guys have had trouble splitting bills with your roommates before? Okay, good amount. So something similar happened with me and my roommates. You know, at the beginning of the year, we were really close. We covered each other for money, and then it came to, hey man, I don't want to get the apples this week in the grocery. Do you think I cannot pay for that? You know, or it came down to, hey bro, I already have cheese. Like I don't want to pay for the cheese. You know, can we like take that out of my side? And it gets very, very, very tedious, right? You have to go through, calculate the tax, calculate what, how much you owe, how much your other roommates owe, how much I owe. So it can get very, very tedious and annoying. So to avoid that, we came up with the snap and split. What this will allow you to do is pretty much scan your receipt, select what you want, what your roommates want, what your other roommates want, and pretty much split automatically. It'll take care of the taxes, the tips, the discounts, anything you want. And it doesn't just stop there. It'll be able to help you split gift cards, any sort of utility bills, rent if you're sharing rent with a roommate, any sort of thing. And it'll help you automate it overall. So yep, that's pretty much it. It's called a snap and split, and hopefully it'll be in process of being made next year.
Awesome. Well, great job. First of all, obviously you practiced that. So good job. You could tell that like that really shows, and that's one of the most important things for doing a good job. So you seemed really comfortable. It was really clear and easy to understand you. You spent a lot of time talking about the problem, which is good. Maybe a little too much. Like I got it pretty fast. It is pretty easy. It's pretty easy to understand. And so I think as a pitch, it was all pretty good. The big thing I'm left kind of wondering, which you don't have to, you shouldn't try to answer right now, but just as I like to think about, is just I've definitely heard of a lot of things like this before. A lot of other splitting, sharing apps for rent, for tabs, for roommates, for things like that. And so that's going to be like an immediate kind of next question is like, how is this different from all of those? And that didn't really come out from this. Or like, or some kind of way like why everyone's going to use this one. I got what it did, but like again, I've just heard of other, I've definitely heard of things like that before.
Could I quickly answer that actually?
Really quickly.
Okay, so the idea here is pretty much it'll be convenience. You don't have to, so if you have ever used Splitwise, you have to manually input all your inputs. This will pretty much help you scan the receipt and it will automatically extract each of the things. So you just go check.
And I thought that does seem like a difference, like so I think that's a good start. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I thought from a pitch perspective, audience participation started with a story. It's a good way to get people hooked. I agree with Josh on maybe a little bit long on the problem statement. I totally got it when you said take a picture of the receipt of the groceries and then select the stuff you want. But then you jump to a bunch of things where you don't select those things, and I was trying to figure out. So like rent doesn't seem very complicated. Other things like that where there's just one cost. So I'm curious how much of it would be from the things where there's a whole bunch of different things and you have to make those selections versus not. So again, you don't have to answer that now, but I thought it was great.
Awesome. Thank you.
Whether your vision for the future is a more accessible society or just to log into your computer without touching it, there is a fast-growing interest in building up the seamlessness of human-computer interface. Now, what is one of the most one muscle in your body with one of the largest capacities for fine motor function is your tongue. So, imagine Imagine typing with your tongue, Neuralink for the tongue. So I imagine that using intraoral acoustic and orthodontically affixed sensors, we could create a small array of sensors to track tongue movements, creating a new language of human-computer interfacing. And I'm so sorry. It's a far cry from the QWERTY keyboard, but it's closer to the average person's wallet than Neuralink. And I believe these sensors can be seamlessly integrated because now microelectronic acoustic sensors can be under 1 millimeter squared in dimension. And I believe that this is, anyway, it wasn't well perhaps.
So great job. I can tell you were a little nervous, but it was great. You worked through it, and that's the most important thing, is that especially if you're talking, like, you're going to get nervous if you're talking to people, and the most important thing is practice, and that's why this is great. I wish I could comment on the idea because I don't know anything about this stuff, but I'm totally fascinated. So like, I'm definitely hooked, and I want to learn more about this. And I love the idea of just something as radical as thinking of a different way to communicate using a muscle that clearly can do a whole lot. So I'm fast. My first question though is like, why isn't it just speech? And so I would love to understand at another time why this is going to be easier than talking. But like I definitely am at if this was the pitch I'd heard, I'd want to see the next 10 minutes of the pitch.
Yeah, I totally agree. It was a really good job. I see a lot of stuff, a lot of really weird stuff. I've never heard of that before, and that's really interesting. And I'm kind of at the same point. I'm kind of wondering. I'm sitting there moving my tongue around, going like, "What? How would I type with my tongue?" I'm like, So yeah, I mean, I think the next step of making it at the beginning, I felt was actually, was maybe could be even tightened up a little bit more, and that might give you a little more time to say like some statistic or something about like, did you know that with your tongue you can blah 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 blah, right, like yeah, just like something that would make me like, wow, you're right, your tongue is so much better, like anyway, but really good job.
Thank you.
Do you guys know what active reading is? It's basically all about asking questions. It's like, what is this new word, or what is this new symbol, or what's going to happen next in the story? And with each question, I'm pulled more and more into the story. So why is it that every time I'm assigned an engrossing article to read in class, I'm also assigned a separate worksheet to answer questions on, a worksheet that's constantly pulling me out? A rule that solves this problem in the simplest way possible. It creates one cohesive, interactive assignment with articles and questions on the same screen. I want you to think for a second how we do that. And now I'm going to surpass all those expectations. I wrote as a Chrome extension that allows teachers to embed multiple choice questions on their screen. The data is then sent to a server, and it's recreated on student screens. That way students can answer questions with a natural flow of whatever they're reading in the margins of the web page. Now, I know you're probably thinking this is a really cool idea in theory, but is there really a need? Like, would teachers really pick this up on their own? And I think here's where it gets interesting, because I think my company straddles this line between innovation and familiarity, to where we have no direct competitors, but there's this other company called Edpuzzle that made $3 million in the first 6 months of 2022. And they do the exact same thing we do, but for videos. So they integrate YouTube videos with questions. So I think the question you got to ask is, why would a teacher use Edpuzzle but not Edworldo? Because we have identical value propositions. And you might say, well, one's video and one's article. So break down the problem further. What is intrinsic to video learning that doesn't apply to reading learning? And if you could tell me that, I'd be interested to know.
It was great. I mean, you definitely had thought through the pitch and had rehearsed it, which is great. My first question, well, so one comment, which is I didn't know about this other company, and I don't know how many people do, but you spent a lot of time comparing yourself to another company, and I would rather hear more about your company. The second thing is where my brain goes first from a problem perspective, and the difference between this and video is that if you're embedding a YouTube video, you can do that. You don't need the rights to it. But I don't know what the deal is with all of the texts that are being assigned by professors, and whether there's a digital version of it that they have where you could even do this. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, is it even possible to get the digital form of all of those texts where you could build this thing next to it? I can imagine how the rest of it works, but that's sort of one problem that I'm thinking through.
Yeah. I apologize if I don't remember correctly, but I think you pitched before, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think before I gave you feedback that you were talking a little too fast, and you definitely slowed down much more. So you probably could even do that a little bit more, but like much, much better. Like definitely noticed a big improvement. I think with something like this, the ed tech's hard. And so the whole like how people are going to buy it really matters. And you know, I think this is interesting, but just being super honest, if you told me like there's this other business making $3 million doing it with books, but you're doing it with YouTube, I'd be way more excited than saying there's this business doing it with YouTube, but you're doing it with books. Because like YouTube is more of like the trend and more, like you said, more embeddable, more easier to work with, more kind of like, so that doesn't mean this is a bad idea or anything, but I'm just like, I think you have to think about like, how do you, like it is more a little like it is actually easier to do it with YouTube, like Chris was saying, and so I get more skeptical about the business model part. Like, okay, like he said, like how does this really work? Can you do that? Who's going to pay you? Like you're going to make money? Are teachers? Well, he runs a really big company, but yeah, so he said more money too. So anyway, but like I said, really good job with the pitch. I think it's really interesting. Really good data points. Those are just all things that'll make it better.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks.
What's up, y'all? So, Sokkath, how much did your laptop cost? A lot, right? Now, Sokkath has an incredibly nice laptop. It's a Mac, tons of compute power. Here's the problem. Half of the time, he's not using a quarter of the compute power that's available on his laptop. He has all this compute power at his disposal, but I've seen his computer, and outside of maybe an hour a day, everything that's running on there is like 2 Google Docs and like one other website maybe. So he doesn't need the compute power that he has. So here's my vision. You buy a laptop, except it's completely empty. There's no parts inside except for a basic graphics processor. And then we create servers that have tons of compute power on them. And you only pay for the compute power that you're using. So every year you pay a certain amount based on the amount of compute power that you use. And we stream anything that you're doing on your laptop to those servers, compute it there, and then stream it right back. And so you don't have to pay for an incredibly expensive laptop, but you can still access all the compute power you might ever need.
It's a great pitch. This is how we used to do it in 1993, so I'm just curious because my first question would be that there's a bunch of companies that are doing some version of this specifically for like engineers. If you're writing code and you're compiling and you're doing all that kind of stuff, there's at least 5 companies that I've heard of. One that I know the CTO at that is doing this, and it's super expensive infrastructure to start building. So that would, part of the question would be, is there an MVP of this that actually could be built for less than raising $30 or $40 million?
All right, I'm gonna be honest. I came up with this like 4 minutes.
That's great. That's my first question.
Right?
But it's an awesome idea. So let's forget the feasibility.
Yeah.
If you could do it, it's great.
I mean, theoretically, I think it's entirely possible, right? So we already do this for a lot of developers. You already have AWS, GCP as your Oracle even, all these suites of tools for developers that want to, say, remotely train a machine learning model or SSH into a certain, compute or spin up an EC2 instance or something and do something there, right? Now, obviously, there's latency issues to solve, but I think that's something that's maybe addressable, and edge computing is a really interesting area that's being developed right now. Possibly that's something we could use, to power something like this, and that's already being used, for example, in Oculuses, right? There's a lot of
Thanks.
slightly on the.
Thanks. Some other stuff you should check out. I know there's a company that does this it provides a big security benefit because there's a security benefit to not having all that running there, and so that's one angle they've been able to be successful at doing it with. There's another company we invested in that is more like what Chris was saying called Coder.com, and that's very much what they do is they just let you do your development all happens that way, and there's a lot of benefits to that too. So I definitely think it's really interesting, but like Chris said, just got to figure out the feasibility. Maybe you still might be able to do it on AWS, even if that wasn't the long-term scalable thing, and they didn't know you were really running on AWS, right? So maybe. Yeah, exactly. So awesome, good job. Good, especially good quick for that being a 4-minute pitch. 4 minutes ago you came up with it. That was awesome.
Hello, my name is Armel. I'm a co-founder of Eclipse AI. So during my freshman year, I started a podcast, and we weren't seeing much viewership, so I wanted to grow the podcast. But I'm broke. I'm a college student. I have no money, barely able to pay for food, eating bad jester. And so we're like, what's the best way to do this? And that's posting clips on TikTok. So we started doing it and saw some traction. But the problem was we're busy. So much time was being spent creating these clips and not actually focusing on making good content. And another thing is posting it on all the different social media platforms. You have Instagram Reels now, you have YouTube Shorts, you have all these places, a lot to manage. So we decided to build one platform that will allow the seamless of clipping and distribution all in one, right? So creators are able to upload their video, create the clips. We predict then which clips will do the best, so they don't have to pick and choose, and then we post it on all social media platforms. And that's the big idea here, is that we allow creators to focus on creating. But the question is, why now? And this can be broken down into two reasons. Number one is you have the advancement of AI. You have companies like OpenAI and even Meta, with OpenAI coming out with text-to-image and Meta coming out with text-to-video. So the technology is there in the APIs. You just need to connect the pieces to build something like this. Second is change in consumer behavior. Our generation, Gen Z, is watching a lot more short-form content. And these big companies are noticing this and doubling down and investing in these short-form creators. And so it is more important now than ever for these long-form creators like podcasters, streamers, and YouTubers to take their clips, to take their episodes and turn them into clips and post on social media. And they will be able to see growth organically. And that is the vision of Eclipse AI. Thank you.
So it's a great pitch, first of all, and I don't know anything about who else might be doing this. If there's no one else doing this, somebody definitely should. I can absolutely see how this could work. It's just the magical AI part that's going to be tricky. So like if a huge part of this is the picking a clip automatically, then you have to be really good at that, and that's not easy. But if you could do that and no one else is doing this, it sounds like a big idea.
Yeah, totally agree. The proof is in the pudding for sure. I know you, and so you guys have pitched before, so I think it's great that you are continuing to do it, getting more practice and getting more exposure to people like Chris and other people that are coming through here, because this is real, not just an idea. And you guys won one of the weeks I wasn't here, right?
Say that again?
Did you guys win the $100 one week that I wasn't here?
Yeah, we won.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm really glad that you're still pitching even after that too, because again, it's more about the practice and everything else too. So thanks for coming up again.
Thank you so much.
So, I know your biggest problem. You're playing hide and seek, and all of a sudden, you want to go to a different building. But wait, how will the seeker know where you are? And that's why we made really good hide and seek, the only hide and seek app that sends your location data unencrypted over the public internet to a $5 server we have that shows your location to everyone in the game. It's hide and seek, but you can play it across the entirety of campus. Now you might be thinking, what's the business model? I don't know. This was just a fun hackathon project. And I want some pitch practice. But we don't even care about your location data. We care about it so little, we send it unencrypted over the public internet. We have the app. Somehow Apple approved it. It's on test flight. If you guys want to play, let me know. I'll give you a test flight invite. It's really fun. That's it.
It's great. That was a really great pitch for it. I don't know if I have another feedback for it, but that was great.
That's a good stand-up routine for a room like this. So it was a good pitch. Not sure about the idea, but it was a good pitch.
I assume you guys were tired of hearing about accounting software. I'll have it next week.
It's definitely the only pitch that I've ever heard about sending location data unencrypted over the internet.
Oh,
so it's
of
totally
course,
unique.
of course.
You win on uniqueness, definitely.
We're working on the encryption now, yeah. It is after the fact feature, yeah.
All right, awesome, thank you. Are there any more? All right, cool. We are up next. Chris, come on up, come on. Do you want your water?
Thank you.
All right, sorry, we're all up here.
All right, I haven't turned around and looked at the room yet, so hello, everyone.
I have to announce who gets the winner. And I think it's the tongue typer. So give Himanshu tell him how we can Venmo you, and we'll send you the $100. What's the question? Wait, no, you don't get to ask. Know that yet. Sorry, it's coming. All right, so now that we're up here, one quick thing, just it's come up in previous weeks. So if you talk, we can hear you up here, like even when you're in the back, and it's really distracting. So please don't talk while we're up here. If you really need to talk for some reason, like go somewhere else. So thank you. But I am super excited to welcome Chris Hyams here. So let's give him a big round of applause. Chris, you all know, I know you've been excited about him coming, but Chris is actually one of the first people that I ever met in Austin. I don't know if you remember that, but you are. When I came here to work for Trilogy in 1999, he had already been here. Were you 95?
I came at the start of 96.
96, okay, so started 96. So he'd been here a couple of years before me, and I came here right out of college to work at a company called Trilogy, and he was already working there. So he really helped kind of plug me in, and I've known him ever since then, and we've worked together in a whole bunch of different ways. And it's just another great reminder to all of you that all these people you're going to meet, including all the people that are sitting next to you right now, and the people that you're meeting in school, and all the other jobs that you have, you're going to see over and over again in lots of different ways. And so just like a good thing to keep in mind. But he has an incredible story, spans multiple different careers as a high school teacher, a software developer, a product manager, and now CEO of Indeed, one of the biggest websites on the internet, one of the best companies to work at, and one that I probably know most of you probably have used before. So super glad to have you here today.
Thanks. Super excited to be here.
Yeah. All right. So first, we'll talk about our T-shirts. So yeah, tell me about that T-shirt. Now I'll tell the story of my T-shirt.
So this is the original. I'll tell you actually the story of how the shirt came to be. So I joined Indeed in 2010. The company was founded in 2004, it was a real company. It was successful. It was growing. It was still pretty stealthy, which is kind of interesting. We can have a long discussion about that at some point if we want to. But the co-founders actually weren't interested in getting any attention from anyone other than the people who they wanted to use it. So they were really focused on making sure that job seekers, if they were looking for a job, they would find Indeed. Back in the olden days, SEO was a simpler game than it is today, and we were really focused on that and got really good at it. We went directly to employers, and so other than that, they were not interested, and including in Austin, where there weren't as many startups back then, and I had a startup and was pretty plugged into the startup community, and I really didn't know much about Indeed until I had the opportunity to meet with the founder, one of the two founders. But the mission was really clear from the business, but no one had actually written it down. So if you asked everyone, when I joined Indeed, there were 130 people in the company. At that time, we had just hit $4 million a month in revenue as a run rate. The company was growing 100% year over year in traffic, in revenue, and employees. And nobody in Austin really knew that they were an Austin company or what they did. But so what was amazing, though, is that everyone was incredibly focused on what the company did, that we existed to help job seekers and help to connect them with jobs and with employers. But if you asked the 130 people, you'd get sort of 130 different versions of what that mission statement was. And so I joined in October of 2010, and that next March, South by Southwest came around, and I went and talked to the product team, and it turned out no one on the product team had ever been to South by Southwest. And I was like, this is ridiculous. You live here in Austin. How can you not have ever gone? So I said, all right, we're in the whole product team, which was 8 people at the time. We're like, we're going to go to South by Southwest, and you guys are going to just listen and learn. And somebody said, okay, well, we need a T-shirt. Indeed didn't have a T-shirt at that point. And so I sat down with the one designer at the company at that time, this guy, Chris Garcia. And I said, all right, we need a T-shirt. What should we do? And Chris started flipping through this notebook where he had like screen designs and charts and graphs and all this stuff. And he had written this thing, which was, I help people find jobs. And we're like, okay, that's it. But the one editorial decision that I will take credit for was we changed find to get. Because we were really about is the end result. We want people to get hired. And yes, we were a search engine, but there's a difference between finding and getting. And so we made this T-shirt. This is actually from the original batch. We made a dozen of these, and we wore them to South by Southwest. And then people at South by Southwest started coming up to us saying, oh, you help people get jobs? I need a job. And we're like, oh, great. Well, I work at Indeed. In fact, we can help you. And then we went back to the office afterwards and started wearing them, and everyone in the office said, this is amazing. So we then made shirts for everyone in the Austin office, and we also had a Stamford, Connecticut office, and someone came to visit. And so then suddenly this became the thing that, at that point, I sort of realized that it was resonating with people, and just having a simple phrase that, like, what do you do? Oh, we help people get jobs. And so we put it on the business cards, we put it on the walls. I created this slide that still is the first slide of every presentation that I've given for the last 12 years, now 11 and a half years at Indeed, which is just, 60-point Helvetica, bold, I help people get jobs with the blue background. And honestly, when people have asked, what is the thing that you're most proud of at Indeed? And it's really that. And I think and we can also get into this, I think one of my skills is not actually, I'm not the best software engineer, I'm not the best product manager, but I'm pretty good at recognizing something that's good and saying, this is something that's gonna work, and then just repeating it over and over and over again. For those of you who are gonna, hopefully go on and start companies and build them, one of the most important things is consistency. Is simplicity and consistency. Pick something that's important and just say the same thing over and over and over again. I'm sure you hear the same stuff from Josh every single week. And it's really important because that's the way people remember things. And I think of all the things that we've ever done as a business, you could go, we've got 15,000 employees in 35 cities in 16 countries around the world, and you could go and knock on anyone's door and say, what do you do? And they would all say, we help people get jobs. And that sort of core idea of what the mission of the business is super critical to everything that you do, but also especially if it's actually how you run the business. So there's a lot of businesses that have missions that sound good or look good on a T-shirt, but for us, it is it's the inspiration that connects us to the humans on the other side of what we're doing, and work is outside of family and health, one of the most important things in people's lives. But it also defines the guardrails of the business. So there's a whole lot of ways that we could make money, but if it's not helping someone get jobs, it really is the thing that people bring up all the time. Do we want to go into selling educational opportunities? Do we want to build an ad business? Is that helping someone get jobs? No, so we're not doing it. And so it's been, the shirt means a whole lot, and we could spend a lot more time on it, but Josh's shirt is a derivative of this one.
Wow. I feel like we could spend, like, I have a whole bunch of other questions, but I feel like
we could easily spend 2 hours just talking about
I feel like we could spend the rest of the
mission.
time just talking about that. Like,
But you should tell the story of your shirt if they don't know it.
so first of all, I've known Chris now since 1999, so 20 something years, and I've been wearing this shirt since I don't know exactly when, but probably 2010 or 11 or something like that, and I didn't know that story. So I've just learned something. I'm actually kind of hoping you can tell me the story of this shirt.
Well, I believe it was a gift from Ronnie.
It was.
Okay.
Do you know anything? I mean, I know
Yeah.
that. Do you know anything else about it? Between where you said
Indeed was founded by two guys, a guy named Ronnie Kahan, who lives here in Austin, and a guy named Paul Forster, who was in Connecticut. Ronnie was the CTO, Paul was the business guy, the CEO. But Ronnie's just a big fan of Josh's, and you have been preaching this gospel of quit your job and go and start a company. And Ronnie is a huge believer in entrepreneurialism, and he made this shirt and gave it to Josh as a gift.
Yeah, so for me, I remember, I don't know exactly when, but for me it was around the time that I was making my LinkedIn profile, which was probably a really long time ago. And you know, there's that headline part, right? And everybody writes like, entrepreneur, innovator, like, I don't know, some kind of like, you know.
Mine says, I help people get jobs.
Right. And I'm like, what do I put there? And I wanted something that was like memorable and provocative, and yet not like kind of like claiming I was something. At some level, like, I mean, just the same thing everybody else said, or like, you know, claiming something, you know. And so, and I ended up on, and it's been there for a really long time, I help people quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs. And I felt like that was something I was like, you know what, like, I think I can back that up and like stand behind that, and that's something I can do for a really long time. And like, and it became kind of my personal mantra. And so then, you know, at some point later, I had not seen this slogan before, and suddenly Ronnie, who is an incredible entrepreneur and CEO and friend, and was one of the founding mentors here at Capital Factory, he shows up with two shirts, like these two black shirts that say, I help people quit jobs, and have a Capital Factory logo on the back. And he's like, here, Josh. And I don't even know about the other shirts really, like, and I'm just like, wow, these are cool. Like, and I, you know, and then eventually I see the other shirts, and I put them on, and I started wearing them, and they were immediately the most popular shirt I had, right? And oh my God, try to like walk down the street in New York City with this shirt on, like, yeah, people yelling at me across the street, like, you know, all kinds of things like that. And it really, like, totally is, you know, a lot of people know me for wearing this shirt and for that slogan. And it's so funny that I didn't make the shirt, Ronnie did. This shirt is actually a Lululemon shirt that I like made. This is a long time ago. I went and bought my own shirts and printed a bunch of my own because I wear it a lot. But yeah, that's where mine came from.
We're actually rolling out new shirts next year with a different font, so if you want to catch
a different
up.
Font?
Well, we now have a custom Indeed font.
The Indeed font. I don't know if, we'll see.
Indeed Sans.
I'll have to check the Indeed font. But you know, the other thing that you said that really resonated with me was about repetition, about everybody in the company knowing what they do, and it made me feel really good because I feel like I could say a lot of those same things about Capital Factory. If you ask people who work at Capital Factory what is Capital Factory, they are immediately all going to say Capital Factory is the center of gravity for entrepreneurs. Like, I know they are, like, because we say it all the time, and I hear them say it all the time, and we all, you know, like, and but like you said, like, everybody knows that we're here to help entrepreneurs. And what do we say no to? We say no to stuff that doesn't help entrepreneurs. Like, we get asked to do all kinds of stuff all the time that people want to pay us to go do. And we're like, well, does that help entrepreneurs? Are we helping entrepreneurs first? Like, then that's not really what we're here to go do. And so that really, really resonated with me.
Yeah, and one piece of that, and I remember someone saying a very long time ago that, you know, when I was in graduate school, if you can't explain to your grandmother what you do, then you don't properly understand it. And that's one of the biggest challenges, and this is why the pitch process is actually really great to work on. Because if something is really hard to explain, then it's going to be really hard. It's not going to be only hard to convince someone to give you money. It's going to be hard to explain to your people who you want to bring on board to work with you, but it's going to be really hard to explain to the company what they should be doing and what's important. And so I recently saw Paul Graham on Twitter, who likes to say things that are
I'm a huge
controversial.
fan. I love Paul's writing.
He said, "There's no such thing as a good writer, just good thinkers." And I actually really like that because I spend a lot of time like really unhappy with people's writing, but it's actually not the construction of sentences in the English language. It's, do you have clarity of thought? Do you know what's important? And do you know how to keep things simple? If you can do that, then it's really not hard to write, and it's really not hard to talk. And then just really reinforcing that and saying that over and over again. And then telling different stories about that. So you heard in these pitches, you can tell a million stories about helping people get jobs from the perspective of a job seeker, perspective of the employer, or what an employee at Indeed does and how important it is to them, but it's all around this same idea. And so that's really something that I got from Ronnie. Is the greatest simplifier I have ever known. He can just take anything that has 4 parts and say, well, it's just this one thing, really. And how do you just get everything down into the simplest atomic kernel of an idea? And until you have that, you should keep trying to tear things apart.
I don't remember who said this, but someone was just talking about Naval Ravikant. I don't know if you follow Naval, but saying how in a similar way, one of his superpowers was really identifying that even though in really complex situations there are a lot of different factors that to go into something, but a lot of times there's really one factor that matters the most, that really drives the outcome and the decision, and being able to identify that and hone in on it and really focus on it.
Yeah, and my French pronunciation is terrible, but Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, I think is how it's pronounced, is the guy who wrote The Little Prince, very famous for saying, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but something like, perfection in design comes not from when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And I really love that.
Yeah. That's a good one. All right, so this next question could take the rest of the time, or I have like a whole bunch more questions too. But how does a high school teacher become the CEO of Indeed?
Not by trying to be a CEO.
Good start.
So
tell us.
This is the last place I ever expected to be, and part of this is also, so I'm considerably older than all of you. So I'm 55, which means that I grew up when tech was not even an industry. That it wasn't an industry basically, and it certainly wasn't something that was cool or lucrative. There was no one, my friend Brian McCuskey, my best friend growing up, his dad worked at Xerox, and so like he was the guy who knew about computers. And I got an Apple II in 1979, but that was like super geeky, and it was definitely not. There was no concept of what you could do with them. They were just sort of fun things to play around with. So my story, and I'll give a version of it. We'll see how long it takes. I grew up. My grandparents on both sides were communists. Russian Jews on one side, Italians on the other side. The Italian side, my great-grandfather was a union organizer, organized coal miners in Pennsylvania. My grandmother was an organizer for the ladies' garment workers in New York, and my grandfather was an activist, and they met basically doing this type of organization. So I grew up hearing every single week from my grandfather how important work was, and the dignity and the pride and the purpose that comes from a job, and how important, whatever your job is, that a job, the value that you provide to the world comes from what your vocation is. And so I kind of had that hammered into me for an early age. And I had a bunch of different ideas about what I wanted to do. I actually grew up, I wanted to make movies. My dad is a filmmaker, and I made 300 Super 8 films before high school and worked every summer through middle school up through college working in film. And then at some point figured out that it was business and not art, and got disgusted and said, I don't want to have anything to do with this. I studied architecture as an undergrad. I was an engineer when I went to college, and then decided that, you know, I couldn't see something that would be interesting to do with that limited point of view, but also just there wasn't as much going on. And so studied architecture, found out I had no talent for architecture, wanted to do something that was useful. So my first job actually out of college was working at an adolescent psychiatric hospital with young addicts and alcoholics. And so I had this interest in addiction and recovery, and I did that, and it was an amazing and super hard job. I had met my now wife of 30 years, but my girlfriend at the time, she moved to a small town in Vermont, so I followed her, moved to a town of 3,000 people in Vermont, and I taught public high school for 2 years. I wanted to work in recovery, couldn't get a job, started as a substitute teacher, and then got hired, and so I taught special education in public high school in rural Vermont. And those 2 jobs were definitely the hardest jobs I've ever had. Like, this job is pretty easy compared to that. And they were also some of the most rewarding things I've ever done. And it was, you know, sort of every day showing up, knowing that what you're doing made a massive impact on somebody's life. Lizzie, my wife, went to graduate school in LA. Another passion, I'd been a musician for years, and so I played music full time for 2 years, tried to become a rock star, failed, would do it all over again. But I spent that time actually working with my grandfather, who had cancer and was dying, and I got to spend the last year of his life every day with him, and that was really kind of what that time was about. And then what happened was really kind of random. Lizzie got a job at Rice University that brought us to Texas, and as the spouse of a staff member, I could take undergraduate classes for free. And I had sort of this vague idea, because this was 1993. There was no World Wide Web yet, but I got an email account in 1990, which was pretty early for that. And I had a roommate from college who moved to Japan, and we were like talking all the time. And this was, in 1990, that was radical and amazing. And so I thought, like, oh, maybe this, you know, I was interested in computers back then, maybe there's something here. And so I basically enrolled for a second bachelor's degree to study computer science. And because I already had an undergrad, I took 5 classes my first semester, and like 2 weeks in, it was like, oh, this is how my brain works, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. And so I got a master's from Rice in CS, and it was really a lot of good fortune and good timing. I was there from 93 to...
That was great timing.
Yeah, I was there from 93 to 95. In the time that I was there, Mosaic, which was the first really widely available web browser, was released. As far as we know, might not be true, but that we haven't found anything to refute it yet. My boss at the time at the Information Systems lab at Rice and myself installed the first web server in the state of Texas, is.rice.edu, downloaded HTTPD from UIUC and got the thing set up and launched the first web server at Rice. So Mosaic and HTTPD was released, first version of the 1.0 kernel of the Linux operating system, the first version of the Java programming language, and Amazon.com all launched in this like 3-year period. It was like suddenly the world looked very, very different.
By the way, just to put a quick, sync up our timelines. So for me, that was my freshman year of college, was 1994. And I remember getting into, they've heard a bit of this story before, but the way I tell it to them at the beginning, the first week of the semester, is how getting into my dorm room at CMU, and there was Ethernet jacks in the walls. Like, it wasn't dial-up. I mean, that was also what was going on right then. Like, it was broadband was just hitting, where you could be on the internet all the time. And just really being in that same spot. And I remember for me, like you said, Mosaic was just coming out like my freshman year of college, and like you could go use the web, and then after like 2 or 3 years, you could buy things on the internet. Like, it was just really the beginning of the internet becoming commercial, and so much opportunity there.
Yeah, so it was an amazing time, and because when I started there, I thought that I was going to get a PhD and just teach, and then it looked like actually there's stuff that you could do in business. I got recruited by this company, Trilogy, which at the time was super focused on Rice because it was close by, and so we actually hired a bunch of people out there. Some of the smartest people I knew at Rice went to Trilogy. I spent 9 years at Trilogy, so I started out as a developer. I did that for 3 years. my wife and I, our first daughter was born right when I finished grad school, because I had this whole life before I got into tech. And we have no family in Texas, so we actually moved to Berkeley. So my first 3 years, I was a remote software developer before that was cool, for 3 years living in the Bay Area and working for this company, Trilogy. We moved here in '99. And then basically, I thought that I just wanted to write code forever. And my boss at the time, Scott Snyder, I had built this sort of infrastructure that all of the products at Trilogy ran on, and he said, we want to build a team around this, you should manage this team. And I said, managers are people who can't code, like I'm not interested in doing that at all. And part of it was I just hadn't ever had a good manager, I didn't know what they looked like. And I'm not proud of this, but I tell the story because it's true. Scott said, okay, if you're not going to do this, then Patrick's going to manage the team. And I said, well, I don't want to work for Patrick, so okay, I'll give it a shot. But what happened was really profound in that because I had all of this other stuff that I had done, I actually understood and cared pretty deeply about people, and I understood the technology, and I found that I could actually help people be better at their jobs. And this is where, I was like 32 at the time, and some people figure out like what they're good at maybe earlier in life, but for me, I finally had this big realization that I had always wanted to be the best at something. I wanted to be the best student, the best athlete, I wanted to be the best musician, I wanted to be the best software developer. I was a really good software developer because I was incredibly careful and paid a huge amount of attention and worked really hard and was really thoughtful. And I could spend 2 weeks trying to figure out why something wasn't working and go to Sean Smith and say, hey, Sean, can you take a look at this? And in 5 seconds, he'd just say, oh, it's that right there. And I just at some point I realized I was never going to be Sean Smith. And I think that anyone who's ever met Sean Smith feels the same way. Sean is the best engineer in Austin, by the way. He works at Data.World. He's an amazing guy. Humblest guy in the world too. But what I figured out is that I'm never going to be the best at any one of those things, but I'm really good, kind of like the t-shirt thing, I'm really good at recognizing talent and also recognizing where something is missing, that if somebody can sort of get the right coaching, they can be better. And that ultimately we put this team together and 10 people could get a lot more stuff done than I can get done on my own. And so if I care about the impact or the results, I'm okay stepping aside from doing the thing that I think is more fun or cool, because I can get a whole lot more stuff done this way. And so what happened then was that it was a really crazy time. So this is right when Josh joined. We moved there in '99, and in 11 months, I went from, I was coding full time, I was managing 10 people, I was managing 30 people, and then I was the VP of engineering with 300 people reporting to me. I had never managed anything before. I didn't know anything about how to do any of that. Josh can probably attest to this. There was nobody else who was qualified there, because we basically hired everyone right out of college. So the entire company was 22 years old, and I was the old guy at 32. But what I found again was that the sort of compassion, empathy, an interest in people, and an understanding of how technology worked made me reasonably well suited for this. And I learned, and everything, and I think this is true for everyone, like everything I've learned on the job. My greatest assets in my life and certainly in my career are the longer you're at it, the more stuff you will screw up. And I've screwed up more things than all of you in this room combined have in your life. And I've learned a lot more from all of those failures and those screw-ups than from any of the successes. I'm really good at pattern matching now and seeing like when other people are heading towards the edge of a cliff, because I've been over the edge of the cliff so many times. And so there's a lot, and of course everyone wants things to go well all the time, but that's not how life works. And going through rough patches and hitting brick walls is actually super valuable. Really
sorry to keep interrupting, but yeah. So you're saying so much, you're dropping so many great things. But so I have kids. I have a 12-year-old son. I won't tell you why, but I sent him a text before class tonight, because I'm not going to see him for a while, and it said, having integrity and character is not about being perfect and never making mistakes. It's about how you handle yourself when you make a mistake or others perceive that you did.
everybody makes mistakes, even adults, and I still do. That's great. I love that. Well, so I'll take a quick detour for 1 second on that, which is that the reason I think that these things are such big assets, part of it is that I've seen a lot of problems, and so I can help kind of identify potential problems. But the biggest thing is as a direct manager and as a leader, it's guaranteed that the people who you are working with are going to screw things up, and how you respond to that really defines whether they're going to make it through to the other side of it, what they're going to learn from that, and how if you create an environment, there's a lot of people who basically are intolerant of mistakes. And if you do that, you're actually creating an environment where nobody wants to tell you what's going on, and you will never understand the truth if people feel like if they tell you something bad, you're going to lose your mind. And so if you create an environment where you understand and embrace that kind of stuff, then you'll actually have a pretty good idea of what's really going on in your business, and you'll have a chance to deal with it. The other thing is that what I found, and this works as a parent too, is that when someone is screwing up, my approach is to share with them the thing that I did that is pretty similar but was a lot worse. And because, again, I have this amazing set of assets, which is all of these terrible decisions I've made about people, about products, about business, about customers, all those kinds of things. And if someone is having a tough time and you say, hey, I'm not going to tell you that you're screwing, you're screwing up. I don't even need to say that. But let me tell you about a time or the 3 times that I did something like this. And here's how I felt, and then here's what I did, and I'm okay, and I'm on the other side of it. The relationship between a manager and an employee, or a parent and a kid, there's this asymmetry of power which puts people on their back feet. But if you can put yourself at the same level as other people and tell them, like, hey, it's okay. Also, people look at you probably and they're like, Josh has never screwed anything up. Look how amazing he is and all this incredible stuff that he does. Josh has screwed up a ton of stuff. And the more that you see people who look impressive to you as human, the more you'll realize that, like, you can do that stuff too. Because I'm not superhuman, and so if I look at someone and I think that they're infallible, then I'm like, there's no way that I could possibly do that. So there's definitely no way that I could be CEO of a company like Indeed, except that I am, so it's clearly possible for any other screw up to land in a position like this. So I'll just share one more piece before wrapping up the life story, which is that I was then the VP of engineering at at Trilogy for a handful of years, and was able to do a bunch of stuff to actually improve how the engineering team worked, and got us so we were producing things that were on time and on budget and didn't have problems and worked really well. And then we figured out that actually nobody cared about what we were building, and it turns out that no one was listening to our customers. And so at that point I figured, well, I love engineering, but this product management thing is probably one of our big challenges. And Trilogy had just hired a VP of product, and so I basically quit my job as the VP of engineering and took a demotion to go work as a product manager for the head of product there, because I thought, like, I needed to figure out what we should be doing, not how we should be doing it. And for me, that was another big leap in terms of I figured out that actually is really where I belong. I was a good engineer, but from a product perspective,
I think you've now said 3 times that you figured out what you really were.
Well, it helps, but I mean, no, but it's that combination of humans and technology. So just like being an engineering manager, I was better than that at being an engineer. But what a product manager does is understand how people think and the decisions that they make. But it's also really important to understand what's possible. So you have to have the grounding in what can engineering produce. I did that for a couple years. I learned a ton, and then basically thought that I had a better idea, and I didn't want to do the Trilogy thing anymore. So I launched a startup. We can go into that or not, but spent 6 years doing that. Josh was an early investor, and we got to know each other a lot better through that process, and was incredibly gracious when the company failed, which is an important thing probably as an investor, because a lot of times, most of the times they will fail. But a big part of that also was just doing something that I'd never done. I didn't know anything about sales, anything about marketing, anything about finance, anything about raising money.
And you assembled a dream team.
Put together a great team.
Even for it failing, like, oh my God, it was Heather, Jonathan, like so many other.
Yeah, no, it was amazing. So and we had a lot of success, and then the 2008 crash and finance. But it turns out like we could spend a lot of time on this. The idea, the simple answer, it was too complicated. I could not explain to you right now, even all this time later, in less than a minute, even what the business did. I have a short summary, but that doesn't explain anything. But I learned a lot from that, and when that fell apart, I was looking for my next gig, and Ronnie was looking to hire a VP of product, and so I was really fortunate, right place in the right time, where this job opened up at Indeed. I fell in love with the business, fell in love with Ronnie and the team, and was able to take this thing that was real, but just very small, and help. I led the product team for 5 years. I then took on the revenue side of the business, and then I've been in this role for 4 years. So I've grown up with the business. That's the other thing, is that I certainly did not come out fully hatched, ready to run a 15,000 person company, but I joined a 130 person company and was there through all of the growth, and had one idea about what we should be doing with our product, and they haven't fired me yet because it seems to be working, and it's been a pretty amazing experience. But it was
150 to 15,000.
Yeah, 130 to 15,000. Yeah,
wow.
And 40 million to 8 billion in revenue.
8 billion in revenue, not like valuation. Wow, amazing. Okay, so I don't think we have time to spend to really go into B-Side, your startup, although it was super interesting and lots to talk about there. But I want to ask you one question about it to put it in perspective, and that is, coming out of that, you've obviously chosen to not do the startup route. I mean, not somewhat through opportunistically, right? It happened and worked, and it's worked really well, right? But what's the difference between being the CEO of a startup and the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the world in some ways?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things that are different, but I mean, there's the startup is the 0 to 1 thing, and I'd spent a lot of time in my last few years at Trilogy, and then a lot of time at B-Side trying to sort of get that escape velocity. Like, we had an idea, it was a great idea. That doesn't necessarily mean you can build a good business out of it, and part of it for me, honestly, was financial. So I mean, anyone who's going to launch a startup, you're not going to be living financially comfortable for a while. If you're super lucky and you have a successful business, eventually you will. But for a long, long time, you definitely won't. And I had 2 kids who were, at that point in middle school and thinking about college. And so by the time we were done, that was, a conversation with my wife, which is I'm definitely not going to another startup right now. And but joining Indeed, part of it was.
Can I just real quickly tie it again back to some of the things we said earlier, at the beginning of class, right? Like, what are one of your big advantages right now? You can take risks.
Yeah.
You don't have a whole bunch of people depending on you.
I would imagine most of you don't have kids, and
I don't want to overgeneralize. Some of you may, but many of you don't. And that is it's one advantage. Like, he has different advantages now, but that's one advantage you might have.
Yeah, no, and it was a tougher thing to do starting in at however old I was, 37, to go and quit and try to start a company. So I'll jump to my job today, because I'm a CEO and not a founder, which is different. It's not my company. The company, number one, I believe, is like a public utility in terms of the value that we provide. We have shareholders, we have employees, we have 300 million job seekers a month to come to Indeed. We have 3 million paying customers. My job is really, as a steward, is to not screw this really amazing thing up.
Don't screw it up.
Really, that's it. It's like, don't screw it up.
It's got cash cow.
But a big part of it,
like Google was like that, right? It's like to have the search engine, right? And there's a little bit of don't screw it up. Like, what funds all the other stuff Google does, like the search business,
but
right?
But then
you talked about other crazy stuff, whereas you guys don't. Well, maybe you do. I don't know.
Well, we do some crazy stuff, but you talked about Ronnie. I mean, so part of the deal is I was there. I was really fortunate to get to work for the guy who whose idea this was and who started this and who built this thing. And so my job today is to make sure that everyone who joins Indeed in 2022 understands what it is that makes the company special. When a startup succeeds, it is 100% a perfect storm. You have to have so many things that go right. And I'm not trying to talk anyone out of it, like you should all go and do what you're doing, but there's 1,000 reasons why a company can fail, and you don't have control over all those things. So Ronnie will also say there were a lot of things that were lucky, but there were a few decisions they made early on that were the reason that Indeed beat its competition and grew, and nobody talks about Monster and Career Builder, who were like these giants at the time that we were sort of nipping at their heels. And so my primary job is, I view myself as like an anthropologist. I have to like understand what is the core of this culture and how it operated and how it worked. This thing that I joined that was a real amazing, I mean, any of you who built the company that I joined in 2010, you'd be so excited if you built a $40 million company that, you know, had 130 people and was growing 100%. That's amazing to do that. And we've been incredibly fortunate, but I think that one of the most important things we've done is not lost those roots. And it's amazing because we've now been, we had Paul as the CEO, then Ronnie as the CEO, then this guy Deco who led the acquisition in 2012, and then me. So we've been through multiple CEOs and still have the same sort of core of what the mission is. The strategy is completely unchanged. The core values, again, we sketched them out, but my job in like writing them down was just what was there when I got there. And so that's a very different job than as a founder. So my job title, I'm responsible for the same stuff as if I started the company. I'm responsible for helping to grow the company and helping to hire people and to make people, you know, grow in their careers and to help more people get hired in the world. But it is different than as a founder. And so I got to have that experience. And I think the biggest benefit for me, besides all the stuff that I learned in startup, is that like I ended up as a really good startup employee. Because if you try to run a company for 6 years, you get a pretty good sense of what it is that the person who's at the top is thinking about at 3 o'clock in the morning when they can't fall asleep. And that made me really like want to help Ronnie and Paul be successful. And I think I was a really good startup employee. And I think that's, so starting a company, you know, the math is not in your favor. Like, you know, if every single one of you left here and started a company tomorrow, you know, 2 of you would be crazily successful. Maybe 5 of you would have like, you know, a good exit and would go into something else. The rest of you, you know, it wouldn't happen that first time. But also I got really resentful with B-Side, with all the people who said, well, with your first startup, it's like, what do you mean my first startup? Like this one's definitely gonna work. But the math is that most successful entrepreneurs have done it multiple times. And most of them don't hit, you know, it's rare for someone to hit it out of the park the first time. And so the experience of doing it, you're gonna screw things up, you're gonna learn a whole lot, you're gonna meet a bunch of people. And some of the best advice that I got was from Mike Maples, who was an investor who came in right after Josh, when he said that, you know, obviously you should plan for success, but you should make all the hard decisions in the business as if you might fail. So when you're making decisions about people, and you know, this came up in a discussion around split of equity with other people, and he's like, statistically, this is probably not going to work. And if you destroy a friendship over what you think is 0.5% of something and it turns out to be 0.5% of nothing, then you've lost a friendship and a chance to actually work with these people again. And if you're wildly successful, no one's going to care about the 0.5%. So that was like really helpful advice, is to imagine, because mathematically most of these things don't work, but what are you going to get out of that? What are you going to take of that? And are you still going to remain friends with the people whose money you lost? You know, that was like the value that I got out of my relationship with Josh was far more than the money he put into the business. Yeah, someday I'd like to hopefully repay him in any way that I can. But it's really important to...
One speaking gig at a time.
Yeah. But sort of the integrity of how you make these decisions that was a really valuable lesson from that first round.
For sure. Do you guys have any questions? There are some out there. All right. I have more questions, and I might come back to them, but we'll let you guys ask them. So start over here. I was worked at Trilogy for 1 year. I was very fortunate. I'm very lucky. If you were gonna pick 1 year to work at Trilogy, I had the best year. It was like 1999 to 2000, the peak of the .com boom. Like they were literally shooting guns of money into the air and like flying everybody to Vegas for the weekend, and like it was insane. And then through that I got connected to people like Chris and a lot of other people, and it moved me here. And
you also launched a business within Trilogy.
And we launched a business and sold it
a
year later within Trilogy, and then I left right as the world was changing and went back to working on my startup. It was a good deal. Got me in Austin. I was graduating from school, and my company was at a stage where it was doing a few $100,000s a year in revenue. So as a college student, I thought I was like hot shit. Like I was like, oh my God, like look at this business I made, you know? But it really wasn't. It was really, I mean, in some ways it was like a sole proprietorship, you know, like I had a few of my friends working for me part-time kind of thing, but it was really just me doing it. And so, yeah, you know, like I considered, like, should I go get a job, or should I keep doing this, or what should I go do? And when I interviewed, and I actually interviewed primarily, like partially because I just figured it was a really good experience. I was like, well, when you're in college, you know, you're going to find out, like, get to the end of college, and it's really easy to go get all these interviews with all these big companies, right? And so I was like, all right, I should probably do this, even if I don't. So which also honestly really worked with Trilogy, because I went into it like not really caring if I got the job, and they could not stand that. Like they were like very competitive, so it made them like, my indifference made them like really chase me. But what won me over in the end was I was meeting with the CEO, Joe Lemont, and he said, he was asking me about it. I said, well, you know, I've got this other company, and like I kind of think, you know, I could just keep running that. And he's like, well, why don't you move down here? And you've been running that on the side while you're in school, so you just like, you've got friends working for you, so why don't you just like keep running that and do my thing during the day, and, you know, see what happens. And if you don't like it, you can go back to running your company. And that was a pretty confident thing to say. But I wouldn't do that today. I don't want working on the side on other projects and things like that. I want to like focus on what we're doing. But he did, and so it got me down here, and I did have my friends work on it for that year, and so it still moved along, but it didn't like maybe grow as much as it would have. And then after that year, then I went and focused on it full time, and now I wasn't going to school and I wasn't working at Trilogy, and so obviously that it grew a lot faster. Like that really helped. That was good for it.
And of all the places that Josh could land, Trilogy was a super entrepreneurial place, and had this program called Trilogy University, which we have stolen and made better at Indeed, called Indeed University, but where all the new college grads in tech come in and spend the first 13 weeks building and launching startups.
Boot camp, yeah. And you get to meet all these other incredible people, and I consider being plugged into this network, knowing Chris and Heather and so many other people that I know through Heather Bruner, the CEO of Indeed, the CEO of WP Engine, who we're referring to, and so many other people that you know that are like the kind of the foundation of my network here in Austin. All right. Yes.
I can imagine that coming in as a CEO for a Indian was hard to kind of like build culture, or not build culture, but kind of maintain it. How did you go about thinking of that? And then second, for someone that's starting to start building a team, what advice do you have for building a team and setting the culture?
Yeah, so it was a little easier than that with Indeed, because I joined in 2010 as the head of product when there were, you know, only 130 people there. So the company grew. By the time I became CEO in 2019, when we were, you know, close to probably 8,000, 9,000 people at that time. So I was there and basically saw things grow up, but I had...
And you were a part of the culture.
I had a front row seat to what the culture was the day that I joined, and like I said, as someone who spent 6 years trying to do something like that, I soaked it up and was just taking notes and trying to understand everything about it. Like I'm a really good study of that, and so then my job became figuring out how to make sure that everyone who was starting new got what was already there. So I didn't have to invent it out of thin air. The lessons from it, though, I mean, just going back to the conversation about the shirt, it's like you can't come up with a clever line and that's your business. But what works about it for Indeed is that the mission not only is sort of like a signpost in terms of where you're going, but it's really, really powerful. jobs are really important. So I mean, like when you're anything that you're doing, and you can build a great business that like is, you know, a franchise nail salon business. But you got to figure out like why that's important to you. You know, I think there's a million people go to business school and then sort of like come up with okay, I get margins and CAC and this and that, and I can come up with something that like works on a spreadsheet. And people do that, and that works. I don't know how to do that, but I do know how to, from having watched this and from having been here, is that if you have something that you can connect to something that is meaningful to people, and you can find people who care about that, then, because what you need is like, okay, there's like a couple people. There's a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk or whatever who have this singular vision, and they're just right, and they're just going to yell and scream and tell everyone exactly what to do. That is not a model to try to emulate unless you happen to be that person. I'm definitely not one of those people, but what really does work is if you have something that you care really deeply about, and it turns out that other people care really deeply and passionately about it, and you can keep reminding them, this is why we're doing that thing, then those people, if they understand it, then they'll make the 1,000 decisions that need to get made every day. And even when you're 3 people in a dorm room, you still can't make all the decisions yourself. People have to understand the framework and what's important and why they're doing it. And especially because if you're going to succeed, you're going to run into 1,000 brick walls along the way, and you have to at 3 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday night when it's not working, like you have to care so much about what you're doing, and everyone has to care about it. You can't drag them along. So I think that's the important thing, is just figure out why you're doing this, and then to some degree, and it's the market is not perfect, but it's generally pretty efficient. Like if there's something that you find that you really love, and it turns out a bunch of other people do it, you can do a bunch of great stuff. If there's something that you're passionate about and you can't get anyone else passionate about it, maybe it just wasn't ever going to happen, or maybe you haven't figured out how to simplify it enough so you can explain it so they could grasp it and tell it to other people. But I really think that the single most important thing is why you're doing this, and having the absolute clarity and simplicity around that. And if you can tell a story that someone else can then tell without you being in the room, then you're onto something.
In the back, in the red.
This question is actually for both of you, so I really appreciate you both can answer. After you graduated college, like in all that path or journey, before becoming successful, like a successful entrepreneur or a successful CEO for a company, what do you guys think is the most important habit to follow or to apply during that habit, during that journey? I'm sorry.
So it's a good question. Josh is a productivity hacker and can tell you all about sort of like the habits and the stuff that he does. I'm not that organized. I wish I was. I'm lucky to have people around me who are more organized. To me, the most important thing in anything that I've done, and I've just carried on, I mean, the same things that I was doing as an activity aide at Van Nuys Hospital working with young addicts and alcoholics, is still the stuff that I do with my CFO when I'm meeting with him one-on-one, which is actually just like caring about another person and who they are. And that's, because frankly, it's because that is the only thing that I know. So I mean, I was having this conversation, there's this book that this, and I can't remember her name, the woman from Google who wrote the book, Radical Candor, do you know her name? Which is this, this idea, it's like, it's one of those sort of 2x2s that like the best way to be is on the scale of, are you brutally honest or are you not honest? And do you care or do you not care at all? That what you want is you want to be like brutally honest, but you want to care deeply. And because then you can look at all the other quadrants and see why that doesn't work when you're working with people. And so I was talking with a guy on the team, and he said, so, I read this book and it really makes a lot of sense, but like, how do you care about people? And I was like, well, you actually have to care about people. Like, it's not something you fake, but it's like you can start out by asking someone how their weekend was and get to know their family and their kids and their dog and things like that. The rest of the stuff for me, like that's actually the one thing that's the most important, is that if I care deeply about the people that I'm working with, and I care deeply about who our job seekers are and who our customers are, and I see them as human, then I have a chance of actually connecting and understanding and making the right decisions. That's not really a habit, but I'm not a habit guy. I meditate. I can tell you that that's the only way that I've kept from going completely insane. That's not a productivity hack. That's just like I'm a neurotic guy, and meditation really helps. So maybe that's the only practical thing I say. I've been doing that for 15 years.
Awesome. No, Richard.
Can you go in a little bit into how you guys outcompeted your competitors, like Monster and Career Builder, and like what that journey was?
Were Monster and Career Builder your competitors?
Well, when Indeed started, they were where the target was because they had all the customers. But so I said we have 5 core values at Indeed. The first 2 were sort of founding principles in the business, and the reason that Indeed won is because of this decision that Ronnie and Paul, the co-founders, made at the very start. So the first one is, if anyone here is trying to build a marketplace business, and if you go and try to pitch Ronnie will ask you this question, which is, who's the more important party in your marketplace? Indeed's the marketplace. We bring together job seekers and employers. And most startups, when you ask that question, they'll say, well, both sides are really important. We're trying to optimize for everyone. And that is either delusional because it's not possible, or it's a lie because you think it sounds better. But the answer is, like, you have to make a decision. And every other job site before Indeed optimized around the employer, because that's who's writing the checks. And that's who funds the business. And it's a logical thing. It makes sense. It's putting your paying customer first. But Ronnie and Paul said the most important is the job seeker. So the instantiation of the mission really as a product strategy is the single question, which is what's best for the job seeker. So any product person in Indeed will ask that question 100 times a day. And there's 1,000 decisions that we've made that I can point to. I'll just give one, like, very recent one, because it's happening right now. We have told all of our customers that over the next year we're going to start displaying salaries on every single job on Indeed. And they can give them to us, or we have amazing machine learning models, because we have 600 million salary data points over the last many years. But the estimates are not perfect, and we're just going to start showing them. And our paying customers are really unhappy about this for a whole host of reasons. Some of them sort of get it, but there's a couple reasons that we're doing this. Number one, like, you just ask job seekers, and 65% of job seekers say that pay is the most important part of a job description. So clearly that's important to them. The other thing is that and we could spend a whole other hour talking about this, we're super committed to equity. And in particular, of all the areas where bias and barriers show up in the world, healthcare, education, housing, criminal justice system, employment is sort of foundational to all of those things. And having a job or not having a job can be make or break in a lot of those different areas. And there's massive bias and barriers in hiring. Pay equity is, most of you probably know the numbers, but Latinas earn 52 cents for every dollar that a non-Hispanic white male does. And you can look at every other version of it. And white men, the only people who earn more are Asian men. But one of the biggest barriers to pay equity is the information asymmetry about how much people are paid. And so we've made this decision because job seekers want it, and because it's the only way that we can actually utilize our platform in a responsible way to bring about change. And so we're doing this, and it's better for job seekers, and they're 30% more likely to apply to jobs that have a salary on them, and our paying customers. And several of them have threatened to stop spending with us. These people spend millions of dollars with us, and we've done it. We're at like 66% of the rollout, and by next year it's going to be 100%. And we've made literally 1,000 decisions about how the product works like that. And because of that, Monster and Career Builder and these other places who are making money in a whole bunch of other ways, and advertisement and not connecting to the value, but basically it's just a crappier experience for the job seeker. And so if you create a better experience for job seekers and more of them come, if it's simpler and faster to find a job, then at the end of that successful job search, there's an employer on the other end who made a hire, and you can build a business around that. And so we passed Monster and Career Builder in job seeker traffic long before, like 5 years before we passed them in revenue. But once that happened, it was really clear that if we had all the job seekers coming in, we had a monetization mechanism that we could, the company was profitable for a very long time, then it was just a matter of time. So, but the second piece that ties into that, and this is really important, is the second core value is that our business model is pay for performance. And that was a radical departure. All of the job sites now do this, but back then everything was classified ads. So you pay $700 to Monster to post a job. 1,000 job seekers might see it, no job seekers might see it, but you paid $1,000. So all the reasons why classified ads don't work anymore. What Ronnie and Paul did was just take the Google model and bring it to jobs. But the pay for performance, what it really means, and it's people sort of ask this question like, how is a business model your core value? And the answer is that every single business makes decisions based on how you make money. It doesn't matter how much you care about the world, every business makes decisions based on how you make money. And so we built a business model where the only way we make money, the only way, and this is where we help people get jobs part is, so we don't sell education, we don't do targeted ads. The only way we make money is if we're helping connect a job seeker to a job that they're interested in. And as our business model is evolving, and the employer is interested in them, which means that not just the decisions that we make, but our algorithms are tuned for value to job seeker. And what that means in the long run is that because that's how we make money, we can keep that first core value, putting job seekers first, no matter what, in all cases. And nobody can compete with us if they're not doing that. Like, I honestly believe that. And then, Facebook and Google and Amazon, like all these other companies, Google's coming hard at the job space, and there's no one that can compete with us if they're not doing those things. If other companies decided to do those things and do them, like very sincerely and without exception, then we would, that would be a more interesting race. But I think like that, those two, 1,000 other reasons, but those are the two real ones.
Next.
How has your studies in art history impacted the way you lead and work at Indeed?
Well, so I'm a big fan of a liberal arts education for people who want to work in technology. And it doesn't mean that you have to be an English major, but I think that it's more, and especially the world is so complicated and technology is so foundational to everything that we do in our lives, that if we don't have people who have read history and understand it, and who understand sociology and who have read literature, then you have a bunch of people who are going to be making decisions about people's health care and the privacy of their data that don't understand any of it. It's like if you read science fiction is science stuff, but it's all about impact on society. It's like, what happens if you have a time machine, or what happens if you have this or that, and then what does that do to people and humans? And if you're not thinking about people and humans, you make really bad decisions about technology. So it helped me just having a liberal arts education to like think about things differently. And I think it gave me a big advantage as someone stepping into a leadership role, because I wasn't just thinking about the bits and the bytes. Studying architecture, I had no idea it was going to be useful, but it turned out that spending 4 years thinking about the principles of design and how humans interact with space and how they make decisions, and architecture is like software, it's the intersection of art and math, everything, and so is drumming, by the way, music. So the stuff that turned out to be interesting to me was beauty and engineering combined. I wasn't preparing for any of that, but those things came back in, and a lot of the stuff that I studied in architecture later turned out to be useful. Also, as we started building offices around the world. I was going to
say, you've got a lot of really nice office buildings.
We had a lot of real estate, and I am unusually involved as a CEO in the design of our offices, because I think it makes Josh has spent a lot of time thinking about this space and what this does, and the space upstairs and what it does, and how people interact as humans in space makes a big difference as to how productive they can be. So I think it was super helpful in a lot of ways.
Are you familiar with the book Range?
No.
I haven't read it yet, but I've heard a bunch about it. And my wife, Amy, she read it, and she's been a big fan of it. And the Cliff Notes is that it really kind of speaks to the liberal arts and says, like, if you really want to go far, you really need to be multidisciplinary, right? And part of Elon Musk's, one of his strengths is that he has fundamental kind of understanding of a lot of different disciplines that allows him to combine that into solving really hard problems. So I think range was that's kind of the broad concept. If I haven't read it, but if I captured it right, it looks
We've
like
had a hand in the front the whole time.
All right, here we go.
So I actually have 3 questions, but I just asked one.
Let's start with one. We'll come back to you.
So one of the questions I had is, in your podcast, you mentioned that the school you went through, Princeton, helped you get indoors and certain opportunities and jobs. How can a student UT compare to someone with an Ivy League degree, and what advantages would someone with an Ivy League person have that a UT student doesn't, and vice versa? And how can UT students, try to ensure they have the same opportunities?
Yeah, I didn't say that because I thought it was a good thing. It was an admission of privilege and unfair advantage and how the world is screwed up. I think first of all, the education system in the U.S. we could talk about a whole lot, but the fact that it's now I don't know what UT costs, but I mean there are a lot of public and private schools. North of you could send your kid to like a private elementary school in New York for $60,000 a year. The best university in Tokyo University and Waseda University are like Harvard and MIT, and they cost $2,000 a year. And so there's a whole we can have a very long discussion about that. But I went to school I was really fortunate. I got to go to Princeton, and I went to school with a bunch of people who had names that you would recognize, like Rockefeller and DuPont and things like that, and they were not very smart and didn't work very hard. I have become so unimpressed by where someone went to school that I actually, when I interview, I don't look at resumes at all, because I think that well, first of all, I have a lot of unfair biases myself. Like I don't like people with MBAs. That's unfair. Totally unfair. If any of you are Macomb students, I'm sorry. But so I don't look at resumes because of that. Because I worked with some MBAs early in my career who were just assholes. And I've worked with wonderful ones also, and Ronnie has an MBA and he's the greatest person. So this is why I'm trying to go over. But I think we all have these biases, and if you went to UT, you're going to look at someone who went to UT and you're going to like them more. And if you went to Princeton, and so it also means that it's also not helpful to see what someone's current job title is, because if we're interviewing a product director and one person who's coming in is a product director and someone else is a senior product manager, it's just not human nature to look at them differently. And so I'm like, we should just assess these people based on how they do on what we have. And interviews are a really, really terrible way to try to figure out who you want to work with for the next 5 years. And resumes are horrible and job descriptions are horrible. We're just stuck. These are the best. So we're trying to get rid of all of this stuff at Indeed because they're terrible. But I think the world is changing a lot. So we eliminated degree requirements for about 80% of our jobs, and we hire faster, better people, more diverse, all of those things. We still have degree requirements. If you're on the legal team, you need to have a law degree. If you're on a senior finance role, you have to have a finance degree. But other than that, I mean, some of the smartest software engineers I've ever worked with, didn't graduate high school, let alone get an undergrad CS. It's a very lazy way to hire. And so I don't have great advice for if you didn't go to Princeton, other than I do think that most people are starting to grasp that. I've worked with people from UTSA who are so much better at what they do, and they're harder working and more critical thinkers than people that went to Princeton. And so hopefully just more people get enlightened about that. But I think the pedigree is total bullshit. The biggest value though is who you meet, and those things are important. So making the most of your time wherever you are, being a part of something like this is way more valuable than going somewhere else just because it looks good on a resume. But I was just being honest that I know that I got advantages from that people look at that resume, and because they have those biases, they're impressed by it. I was a terrible student at Princeton. I was a great student when I went to grad school. I was a terrible student as an undergrad, but like I have that on the resume. But that's why when I don't even talk about it usually, if people ask me where I went to school, I usually say I went to school in New Jersey and just kind of leave it at that.
Do you have any data from Indeed about how, in general, that difference might be perceived? Like the
what's a good question?
Because if anybody does,
yeah, I mean, so we've done a bunch of experiments. So there's all these different things that are where there's known experiments in bias in hiring. The most famous one was the study that the University of Chicago did, and now it's about 15 years ago, where they just took a set of resumes and sent them out to the same jobs with the names Emily and Greg or Lakeisha and Jamal. And Lakeisha and Jamal had to apply to 50% more jobs to get the same number of callbacks. That was the only thing they changed. They did these other things where they saw statistically relevant differences in the zip code. If you came from a 90210 versus somewhere else, that people were less likely to respond to that. So we've done a bunch of experiments with name blinding and also with removing college degrees, and more candidates get contacted when you don't show any at all. And so there's clear bias in there. I know that just in our own hiring that when we remove them from the job descriptions, we got like 50% more applications to those jobs, and they weren't lower quality, and we've hired more people as a result of it.
So I know you guys have more questions, but I want to still dig in a little bit more on this, and there's a bunch of good things here. So at Capital Factory, I've been the one pushing on my team to publish salaries when we post jobs, because I'd hate it when partly I was feeling like we'd get to the end of the process and everybody's emotionally committed, and then suddenly we realize we're not on the same page about comp, and it's like...
which is a waste of time for everyone.
Yeah, I'm like, why did we just do all that? Like, can we just like tell them what and oh my God, like it gets so complicated. It's like, then like some... employee who's here now sees this job posted for a job that they don't really understand necessarily what this new job's going to be or what it is, and of course now they're comparing their comp to the comp of the thing that's getting posted, and then so my HR team is pushing back on me. Well, I don't want to post post the comp, and but we've been going back and forth, and so but then I was hiring for like a really senior position, and I wanted to attract like really, really great people, and I put on a number there that I thought was going to be like really attractive, and it worked. Like I got really great people to apply, right? So I know we've been dealing with that one.
But so what you're describing is the reason that bigger companies, this is why our customers are unhappy, because, well, first of all, most of them actually don't have a range for their jobs. So what they typically do is, how much do you make? Okay, we'll give you 5% more. And so if you do that, and if you believe all of the data that shows that there's pay inequity in the world, if you do that, you're guaranteed to perpetuate inequity, because women and people of color are going to be making less, and so if you pay 5% more than someone made, I guarantee you will be paying your white men more than you're paying everyone else. So, but a company that doesn't do that has to get their act together first to say, here's the ranges, and then number two, if the answer is it's hard to hire now, so we have to offer more, then it means you have to pay your existing people more, or you're creating more inequity. So the reason that people don't want to, why there's resistance, and we're just sort of, it's kind of like why people hated Yelp when they first came around, or why people hated Glassdoor. This is like happening, right? There's nothing that anyone can do to prevent transparency. That's like the one thing the internet is sort of guaranteed to towards entropy and towards transparency. But it's going to force a whole bunch of people to figure out this stuff themselves. And if you do it, the answer is it's going to be better for your existing employees, and you won't waste time, and you'll attract the right people.
Okay, so resumes are bad, interviews are bad. What's good?
So two human beings having a conversation, it turns out. So
That's not an interview?
Well, it's better than deciding who to interview by having human beings look at a piece of paper before, or something on a screen. So we have a product called the Indeed Hiring Platform right now, where you could go and take one of your jobs from Capital Factory and sort of say, like, claim this job. We give you a whole bunch of criteria to choose from. You say, these are the things that I don't want to talk to anyone that doesn't have these things. And then you say, I want to interview Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 6 p.m. And then you just show up Tuesday and Thursday from 4 to 6 p.m. and our algorithms go and find the right people, they assess them, At the end of that assessment, they find out you've qualified for an interview, you get to schedule the thing yourself, and then you show up. And right now, we've been doing that 75% of the time. The people who do those interviews say that this person was a good fit for that job. So we've taken a process that used to take weeks and taken it down to hours. But the trick is that because we're eliminating the resume entirely from that process, you're getting dramatically more diverse candidates, and also in a universe where right now we have, there's 2 open jobs in the U.S. for every unemployed person in the U.S. And the mismatch is even greater than that, because that assumes that every unemployed person matches exactly to an open job. But in a situation like that, being able to be faster than everyone else is super, super important. So if you can create a candidate experience.
Being fast in hiring is super important.
It's super, super important. So we're doing it one step at a time. So the first thing is to get rid of the resumes. We do have actually, so interviews are bad because they are subjective and they're not structured and a whole bunch of things. So we're working on products to help people interview better, but we're also working on outsourcing the interviewing for you. But then eventually what we want to get to, so we have, this is sort of in the more sort of futuristic thing, but we have a company that we acquired in the UK 3 years ago that is now growing in the US. That is it's an hourly temporary staffing platform. So think of it like Uber, but instead of driving, we have a whole bunch of different industries, from hospitality, light industrial, the Moody Center. So the Moody Center right now, half of the staff there are people who are coming through Indeed Flex.
I have the domain uberworks.com if you want it.
What is it?
I have the domain uberworks.com.
Oh, nice. Really?
You know what that is from, right?
Yeah. Well, Uber had it.
No.
Oh.
Trilogy had it.
Oh, really? Oh,
that was when the
that's right.
Trilogy
Oh my God,
started.
that is hilarious.
Before Uber existed.
Okay,
and I have
that's
the
right.
domain name, and Uber's tried to sue me for it, but they haven't gotten it.
That's pretty good.
I would give it to you.
Talk about that.
If you want it. You have it for free.
So what they do is that for every type of job that we have, so if you're going to be a barista, they have just sort of figured out what are the 7 questions you need to ask if someone is a competent barista. And because it's shift work, it's not the same as making a decision for 5 years. So we have a lot of friction for onboarding. You come on, we ask you these questions, we interview you, we figure out what you're qualified for, and then we basically qualify people for a specific set of things, and then they can just browse a bunch of shifts, book a shift, go work that night, get paid in the app the next day. Now when people do that, we also 65.
And they can build up a reputation.
65% of the time, we get ratings from the worker on the job, but also from the job on the worker on a specific set of dimensions. So we're building up basically a verified set of skills, which is absolutely.
I've seen so many
massive.
startups pitch me that idea over the years. By the way,
it's really hard. So they're all. It's a great idea
to make it work, right?
But it takes a whole lot to make that work.
Yeah, no, it's the LinkedIn for
and the difference for us.
Kind of
so we're
these other jobs, right?
The difference for other gig platforms, which are everyone's a 1099 worker. We're an employer of record. So we're an actual staffing firm. We are the employer. We are responsible for insurance and benefits, and we pay them, which means they can also get uninsurance benefits if they get laid off and things like that. And so the vision is at some point, we're going to be the world's largest employer, right? So we're going to have a couple million people who are working on the platform. We're going to have the actual details of the skills that they have done, and we're going to have a whole bunch of industries that we know that you can work this job, build up those skills, and then we can just say you're qualified for that next thing and help people grow an actual career through that. And then 50% of the people who are doing temp work now want a full-time job, so we can also help them with that on the Indeed platform. And about 30% of people who are searching on Indeed for full-time work also need a job on the side or are looking for more flexibility. So it's a long-term plan to totally get rid of them, but we're doing bits and pieces of it right now.
So if you were the largest employer in the world, then I think you would technically be able to say that you are fulfilling your dream of helping people get jobs.
Yeah, but part of it is that if we do that, then we can think about the power of the type of purchasing power as offering insurance and benefits to the employer. We could be the world's best employer as well as the world's largest employer.
Totally. One more thing on the hiring process. So for me, what I found, and I'm curious if you employ anything like this, some of this was inspired from Trilogy, some of it from Brett Hurt and some of his work for Bizarre Boys and then Data.World. I can't do it for every job, but when I can, we really make people do assignments, like perform something, do something. And I have found that to be incredibly revealing. Like, I mean,
So I'll give you
coding is one thing, but like I do it with a lot of other roles as well, and we'll narrow it down to like 3 people, and we'll have them ranked, and we'll think this person's the best, and we send them off, and we're like, okay, everybody do the same thing, so then you can compare them. They're like exact, you can do like I kind of just put them up right next to each other, and it's amazing how often the best person just completely falls out. You're like, oh my God, no, never. Like that person is not nearly as good compared when you see like the result of the work they do.
So we've been doing that forever, and I'll give you the thing that we landed on, that if you're hiring a manager, is the single best thing that we've ever come up with. So we were trying to think like, okay, for coders, they write code. For you've got all these different things. So when we hire managers, they go through all the normal stuff, and then we do a mock interview. So we have the manager, if you're hiring a guy who's going to be leading product managers, we will have them say, okay, you work now at Airbnb, interview Scott over here as if you were trying to hire him onto your team. And we have one person who sits in and observes, do a full hour-long interview. Then we go in with the entire interview panel, all the people who are meeting with them, and we do a debrief and say, like, would you hire Scott as a product? And so you don't have to pretend it's Indeed, like, what were you looking for? And the person who observed is also in that discussion. And what you get from that, first of all, is what does this person think makes a good product manager? How do they get at that when they're trying to get interviews? Are terrible, but there are good interviewers and bad interviewers. How did Scott feel afterwards? Is this someone they would want to work for, even if they got a no? Because it's really important if you're doing a lot of interviewing. You want everyone to have a great experience. If they fail the interview, you want to say, oh man, I'm going to go and practice for the next 6 months and try to interview again because that place was awesome and I want to work with those people.
That's a really good point, and just to put another point on top of it, just because, and when anybody leaves your company, whether they quit or you fire them, you want them ideally to walk away saying that same thing, and it's super hard to do. You'll never be perfect at it, but it'll pay back. Over time in a big way.
But also, if any of you have interviewed for internships before, you probably had good experiences and terrible experiences. And there are people whose ego is on full display in an interview because they're just trying to show you how much smarter they are than you. And that comes out. Like, this is an incredibly, amazingly powerful litmus test. But the other thing, and this is why I'm so convinced that interviews are terrible, is that Scott, which is not his real name, but there's one guy who we had for 4 years who was the mock interviewee every time. And when we got to the debrief, the answer was no, like 90% of the time. And he's one of the best product managers we have. And he's just like, gets super nervous when he interviews and kind of like sweat a lot and like couldn't get the right words out. He's like amazing product manager, incredibly analytical, super creative. And 90% of the time, all these people interviewing him said no. And so that was sort of where the final straw for me was like, we have to get rid of all
if
of this.
If they won't hire your best person.
Yeah. Which is fine. It means that he's going to stay for a while because he's not going to interview very well in other places. But that, like 100%, you have to get people to do something real when you're interviewing them. And for a leader, if you have them interview, you will learn so much about them.
I like
and
that.
what's
That's a
important
really
to
good
them.
one. Who hasn't asked a question yet?
So that was my next question. And she told me that no one in the whole world knows what they're really doing. She was a professional.
True.
And Chris Hyams, you followed the same suit. I mean, you were an English major and then turned into a product manager, you love music, and somehow all of these things, the culmination of plucking all these skills, helped you eventually become the CEO of Indeed. I'm wondering, because, I mean, definitely, I don't know. Do you have any words of advice or wisdom for people who don't really know what they want to do in life, or don't know what they're doing? You said you figured what you want to do at 32?
Yeah, so my grandfather, the same one who was the union organizer and the activist and who taught me about the value of job, what he always said was, whatever you're doing, because part of the principle is that there's dignity and value in everything you do. It's like whatever job you have, it's the most important job in the world. And if you are sweeping the floor, be the best floor sweeper ever. And it's not to say there's a whole bunch of different things that people are motivated by, and people can be motivated by advancement or by money or by alignment to a mission. But I tell you, there's nothing as a leader or a manager that matters more than someone who just wants to do a great job at whatever they're doing. And the people who...
And people won't stay in a job if they don't feel like they're doing a good job.
And the people who get promoted and who get new opportunities are the people who are like super excited about whatever it is, and they get sort of... I've never asked for a promotion in my life, and I sort of told some honest stories about really not even wanting them early on, and I also the farther I've gotten in my career, I mean, a lot of people are really focused on wanting that next thing, but the next thing is harder. Whatever you're doing, like this job is really hard, and I think it's important to have some humility about like how hard these other things are. But yeah, the best advice is try to fall in love with whatever you're doing and see it through the lens. For me, it's always through the lens of like, how can I be useful or helpful to someone else? And if I can find a way to do that, then my mind naturally is going to be like, oh, well, there's a better way to do this. So if I have to sweep the floor, if I get a different kind of broom and I start in that corner, go to the, like, I can get that done. So I'm always wanting to just sort of like figure out ways to make things better. But as long as you're happy with the thing that you're doing because you're satisfied, because you're helping people and you're doing it well, then frankly, it doesn't matter where you land. I wish I could give more specific advice of like, if you want to be a CEO, you need to do X, Y, and Z. I have no idea. The only thing I can tell you is like what I did, which was I didn't try to do this and ended up here. But I honestly believe I would have, I mean, I was happy when I was doing other things. I think I would have been happy if I ended up as a high school principal, because I really loved teaching and I loved helping kids, and this is an unexpected path for me. But if the answer is like, I know this is where I want to get, how to get there, there's probably other people who are better at giving that advice. But if you enjoy what you're doing along the way, you're going to be okay wherever you are.
Okay, but real quickly, I mean, you look right now like you're at this kind of like you're in a great spot, you're very successful, you're very confident, you're very like zen, at peace, like you know where you belong and like where, you know, and you're but like you've had a bunch of stops along the way where you probably did not feel that way, right? Like when B-side failed and I got the email from you saying, hey, I'm sorry, Josh, like the company's folding and, you know, you're not all the money you put in, you're losing, which we're all good with, but just, you know, like it was a real hard email to write, right? And I bet you weren't feeling that good, right? And like, how did you then go on from that to then come back to then, I mean, you know, it's like...
Well, but it's not like, I mean, just because Indeed is doing well and I have a cool job, there's hard shit that happens every day. You know, there's when you have 15,000 people, somebody's going through something really rough at any point in time. And I'm sure everyone notices that the world for the last 2.5 years has been through a really rough time and spot. You know, part of that, and I don't know if I'm going to like be able to drop any sort of philosophy that's going to be helpful there, but I think that honestly, at the I was more sort of centered in the last 3 months of B-side than I was in sort of the 2 years before that. There was a lot of sort of frantic running around and doing things, and at the end, the place that I got to was, I mean, it's just so. Okay, here's the philosophy that I'll drop. At the end of B-side, I sort of came up with this theory that there are two patron saints of entrepreneurs, and it's Don Quixote and Mr. Spock. And so if you're like, listen to the 5 or 10 pitches that we heard here at the beginning, like you have to be a little crazy, right? You have to have this Don Quixote belief that like you just see the world differently than everyone else, and everyone else is wrong and no one else gets it. If you're only Don Quixote, then you will take everyone with you off the edge of a cliff. So like once a week at least, you need to be able to take off the Don Quixote hat, put on the Mr. Spock ears, and just be completely rational and unemotional and look at the data and the facts and say, is this working or not? And if it's working, then you take off the Mr. Spock ears and you go back to being Don Quixote. But so companies work either when you have someone at the helm who can do both of those things, or if you have two people and one is Don Quixote and one is Mr. Spock. But if you're only Mr. Spock, you'll never do anything interesting, and if you're only Don Quixote, you'll definitely run out of money pretty fast. And so I think part of the deal was like I got to that through that process of having to face failure, and by the end, I was in a very rational state of like, this thing is either gonna work or it's not. I poured my soul into it, I really wanted, but like, it's either gonna work or it's not. The market is either going to support this or it's not. So while I'm here, I knew how many pennies were in the bank, how many people we had, how much we were burning, how much time we had, how many more meetings that we could take. Number one, I was totally honest with everyone on the team, so there was not a single person there who didn't know when we were running out of money. I know a lot of people, you see stories all the time of people showing up and the doors are locked. Like, that's pretty crappy. And it meant that certain people, like Mitesh, who had a couple of kids, he's like, I can't stick around, I need to get paid. And he left, and I was like, that's great. I'm sorry that you're going, but like, I'm glad that you can make that decision and you're not gonna get stuck in a bad place. So by the time I got to the end, it was that I had developed enough of that balance where I knew, number one, math is math, and if you run out of money, you're out of money, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So every minute I showed up and did everything I could up until that point. I was honest and transparent with people. And then I had, even though I was a lot older than all of you at that point, I was like, I have more entrepreneurial years in me. And if the market says that this isn't gonna work, I wanna go and put my time and my energy behind something else that can. Which is why when I met Ronnie, it was like super exciting, because okay, here's a thing that has escape velocity, but it's just that big and it could be really, really big. And so I was able to sort of bring that. But I think that the deal is it's helpful. You have to just accept that things are the way they are. And just because something is beautiful or a great idea, it might or might not even be a viable business, and it definitely might or might not be a great business. And as long as you go into it with the ability to accept that if it doesn't work, you're going to be okay, then you can take a bunch of risks and do a whole bunch of different things.
Well, we're just about at time. I want to make sure to ask you, as a kind of a closing question, how startups and particularly students can best take advantage of Indeed.
So that's a great question. Well, I mean, if you actually start doing something where you need people, you should use Indeed to hire. And if you're doing that, let me know and we can hook you up. The other thing, though, is that we have, if you're doing anything where you care about anything having to do with the labor market or future of work or where things are going, we have a team of PhD economists that have access to a pretty amazing data set that we have, which is 300 million job seekers and 25 million jobs, and all of the data that's available to other researchers. And we publish data every single week all over the world. So hiringlab.org, totally free resource to everyone. We share a bunch of insight, and if you want to understand anything about industries, we've got a whole bunch of data there and a whole bunch of research that is super useful and helpful. And then we also, we have this Indeed University thing where we have an internal incubator, so we've launched like 157 startups in the last 8 years within the business, and we do public events where we talk about this, and so be happy to share with you the next time we're doing something like that. But at any point in time, if you're trying to hire, we'd certainly be happy to help.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have to wrap it there. I try to always end on time, both for you all to be able to make it back to campus and for Chris to be able to get back to his family and other things. We'll put up the slides for attendance. Himanshu will in just a sec. And I want to also just remind you all just about the rest of the semester real quickly, so please stay in your seats for just a few more minutes. But next week, we have venture capital with Lawton Cummings. Lawton's general partner here at Capital Factory and one of the 2% of all the venture capitalists who are women. And so she'll be here next week. Really excited to have her join us. The next week we have Nick, one of the founders of Apptronic, which is one of the top robotics companies in the world, which came out of UT Austin. Really amazing company. Gordon's going to be doing that interview on the 10th, on the 3rd. On the 10th, we're going to do an online class that'll be an AMA about the lab, and part of why we're doing that is to try to make it so as many people can participate as possible. So for that one, I'd really appreciate your help encouraging other people around campus to be able to tune into that, to learn more about the lab, people that might want to take the lab or things like that. And then the last class of this semester for us is right before Thanksgiving on the 17th, and we've got Lolita Taub coming in, who's another venture capitalist and investor, and that'll be like a end of the semester pitch off where we'll award $1,000 to the best pitch of the night. And then we go off to Thanksgiving, and hopefully lots of you submit lab applications, and I'll be looking at all of those, and we'll be doing interviews for the lab the last 2 weeks of school before the end of the semester. So that's...
Can I just say one more thing, which is that for all of you, you have an incredible opportunity being in this class with Josh. Josh is a humble guy, but Austin did not have a startup scene before Josh was there. I mean, there were a couple of startups, but everything that people think about what Austin is like in terms of this Capital Factory's center of gravity for entrepreneurship, none of that was here. And if there's anything that you can do while you're here at UT, suck every bit of value that you can out of this class and out of your ability to be around Josh. He is an extraordinary guy. You guys are super lucky to be here. Thanks for letting me join you.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Chris. I need a selfie with us with our shirts.
If y'all need validation, just meet me at the front.